All right, I think we have just about everybody in. So again, I wanted to thank you for joining. My name is Sarah, and I'm going to be your moderator for today's accessibility panel discussion. Again, I want to thank all of our NDEAM sponsors who are on the line today and who are working with us. We value your partnership and all of the incredible work that you're doing for people with disabilities. A couple reminders before we get started. Today's session is scheduled for 1 hour from 12 to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We are recording this discussion and we will send out the link to everyone who registered as soon as possible. We are going to provide live captioning, and I am about to send the link to access that live captioning through the chat box. And please feel free to ask questions, provide comments through the chat box as well. Everyone's line is automatically on mute, so we really encourage everybody to enter anything that you have in through the chat box there. But let's go ahead and get started. Let's dive into this discussion. Today we have Drew and we do have John with us as well as our panelists. Let's do a couple quick introductions. John, if you wouldn't mind just quickly introducing yourself, give a visual description as well as your background, that would be great.
Sure, thanks Sarah. And before I forget, I just want to thank you, Sarah, also Drew for being on this panel, and also Ben. I just think it's really cool that you guys are doing this, so thanks to you and your organization. But yeah, I can quickly introduce myself. So my name is John Bedard. I'm a white 35-year-old male. I have brown hair, bushy eyebrows. My license plate says my eyes are hazel, whatever that means. And I've been an engineer for 15 years, and I think the perspective that I can offer on this panel is I've just had a wide array of experience working on projects big and small where accessibility was, you know, either a chief concern, or I was on some projects where accessibility was kind of forgotten until the end, and that's a hard lesson to learn as well. So that's my hope, is that I can sort of bring that experience to this panel and talk about sort of the good practices, gotchas in accessibility, tools that engineers use, team composition for building accessible apps. So that's what I hope to do. Thanks.
All right, yeah, thanks, John. So this is Drew Nielsen speaking. I am also a white male, mid-40s, brown hair, reddish brown beard, blue eyes. I use he, his pronouns. I work for the General Services Administration in our Office of Government-Wide Policy. And I work for, even more specifically, I work for the Government-Wide IT Accessibility Program. I've been working in IT accessibility for the past 10 years-ish, maybe a little bit more than that. And prior to that, my background was actually more in the softer consulting, management consulting side, working for a couple of the big consulting firms. Also, thank you, Sarah, for putting this together, and thanks, John, for being here. And of course, our thanks always go to interpreters and captioners.
Wonderful. Thank you all. So, Drew, I wanted to start with you. We're talking about accessibility here. What does accessibility even mean to you? How would you define it with your background and your experience?
Yeah, accessibility, in particular, if we're talking about information technology, it really means equitable access to both information and to functionality. So if we're providing services or products via information technology, it's having equitable access to that. And the whole purpose of equitable access, of course, is to avoid any type of discrimination because of a disability that someone might have. And while I'm on that, one thing I would mention is that about, as of the last census in 2010, about 1 in 5 Americans has some kind of disability. So there's a really good chance that one of, if you have a company and you're offering services to the public or products, there's a really good chance that your customer base, someone in there has a disability. That's roughly 68 million people in the country. So even if you don't, and even if you don't have a disability, it's likely that in your lifetime, if you live long enough, you'll acquire one. So there might even be some self-interest in making IT accessible.
Absolutely. We always say that thinking about how many people don't self-identify and self-disclose, knowing that over 70% of disabilities are non-apparent, it's more than 1 in 5 Americans, even 1 in 4 Americans. It's just a matter of making sure you're doing everything you can proactively to provide that equitable process. So going over a couple different terms, I know there's a lot of accessibility terms. Two of which I know are often thought of are Section 508 web accessibility and WCAG, or Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And sometimes I know I'm even a little bit confused between the differences between the two of them. Are there some distinct differences that we should be aware of? Do you have to be compliant with both Section 508 and WCAG, or what do you advise there?
Yeah, really good questions, and there's no wonder that there's some confusion because the Section 508 and WCAG have had relationships since 1998, when Section 508, or 99 when 98 when the legislation was passed, 99 when the regulation was created. That originally Section 508 was patterned after, or it essentially kind of restated the WCAG 1.0, so Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And then WCAG advanced and Section 508 stayed the same, and then there was a recent update. So Section 508, there was a recent update to update and revise Section 508 to match WCAG 2.0. And so what's the difference between the two? Section 508 specifically refers to legislation that requires all federal agencies in the US to make their IT accessible to people with disabilities, whether federal agencies are buying it, building it, maintaining it, or even just using it. And that also applies to federal funding in general. So even universities that are using federal funding, if they're using that federal funding to buy IT, that IT also needs to be made accessible. But that's a legislation, again, that's specific to federal agencies. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines is an international set of guidelines that is maintained by the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3, or W3C. And that's the same organization that defines the specification for HTML. And so the World Wide Web Consortium, as part of their Web Accessibility Initiative, defined these WCAG guidelines. And different countries have different approaches to incorporating them. Europe, for instance, they have incorporated with more recent legislation. They are following WCAG 2.1 and will adopt 2.2 when it is updated. The U.S. legislation is following WCAG 2.0. I'll throw another term in there, and that's the Americans with Disability Act. And so often companies, you may have people, or you may see in the news that it's important to be ADA compliant with regard to IT, and that also creates some confusion because the question is, do private companies or does industry need to comply with Section 508 or with WCAG? And here's where the ADA comes in. Courts across America are increasingly requiring that that companies make their IT accessible to people with disabilities using the principles of ADA. So just like if you offer a service and have let's say a public entrance to your building, your public entrance needs to be accessible to somebody in a wheelchair. And the same principle applies to your website. Essentially, your website is your front door, your virtual front door. And just like you wouldn't say to a wheelchair user, you can go around the back entrance, you also wouldn't ask somebody to use some other kind of workaround. And so as recently as, actually it was this time last year, a case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. It involved Domino's and their app, their ordering and delivery app, that the Supreme Court upheld a decision from a lower court that required that they make their application, their mobile app accessible to people with disabilities. When their contention, I think originally was that someone with a disability could just use the phone, and that they get the same service, but it's not equivalent. Using the phone is essentially like saying to a wheelchair user, you have to go all the way around back to come in. So that's where the ADA comes in. Is we're applying that same principle. You need to make your public services and offerings accessible to people with disabilities, even if they're virtual, or so that your virtual front door has to be accessible. And again, different court rulings. So what does that mean to be accessible? Essentially, they point back to Section 508 and the standards that also incorporate WCAG 2.0. Use those to determine how to be accessible for your IT. So there's kind of a long answer. Hopefully I touched on the right parts and
yeah.
That answers.
No, I think that's extremely helpful. Just clarifying again, ultimately it is beneficial to be aware of both Section 508 requirements and WCAG. Whether or not you're a federal contractor, these requirements are in place. And I think it's extremely valuable to be aware of both. There is some crossover, of course, between the list of requirements to be fully accessible and compliant, but it's valuable, again, to know what both of those are, because these are standards that companies are being held to, just as federal contractors for Section 508. It's good to know what those are, the fact that there are requirements out there. So I think that's extremely helpful. Now, there are a lot of accessibility features. I know I've seen the list for WCAG. Anybody on the line who has seen the list for the WCAG requirements, it can seem a little bit daunting. So I was wondering if you could give us, I know it might be hard to give a top 3, but top 3 accessibility features that people tend to forget when designing their websites, that we should just remember to look out for these 3 things when we test.
Yeah, sure. Primarily, I think, to get started, simply make sure that your web applications, mobile applications, your web content, make sure that it's keyboard accessible. And that often helps you answer a lot of the other accessibility issues so that makes it usable for somebody who might have a mobility impairment or might be blind and using a screen reader. Making it keyboard accessible often helps you address some of the other issues that also help make it accessible not only to those users but to other types of disabilities. So yeah, often the average user, we think through a use case where they're using a mouse or they're tapping on the screen and not realizing that there are some users who have to navigate using a keyboard only. And so if you create functionality where you have to, and your only way to access that functionality is with a mouse click, or getting information only on a mouse hover, then we're forgetting about those users that are using a keyboard. So that'd be a big one. Making sure that your form labels are your forms and your labels for your form elements are programmatically associated. So that's kind of more tech talk for the developer, but making sure that they're adequately described and adequately associated programmatically, so that again, those screen reader users in particular can navigate their way through forms and know how to interact with those particular form fields. Another thing I would add in there is, in general, use native HTML elements and the native semantics that are associated with those, rather than creating custom widgets and applying ARIA roles that are there if you know what you're doing. And anyways, use the native HTML and native semantics, and more often than not, you'll be better off there. And then finally, for non-text content, so your images and graphics, animations, make sure that you describe those in text, and there are various ways to do that. Again, there's some tech talk there for developers, but alternative text, an actual alt attribute that goes on the element if it's an image, or other ways to label that or provide alternative text programmatically so that a screen reader user can access that. And there are a few others, but those would be the top 3.
Yeah.
And I can add to that second thing that Drew mentions, that is the easiest way to build accessible apps as an engineer. Just use the native widgets. You know, you're rendering text, use a text widget. You're doing a form, use labels and inputs. So just don't try to be custom about it, and stuff will just work out of the box.
Mhm. Absolutely. And quickly speaking to the point about alt text, how many times are you trying to reach a certain audience, like people with disabilities, or trying to make sure that you do have a fair and equal and accessible process, but you then aren't making the images with your recruiting campaigns accessible by including alt text? Are the images in your email signature accessible? Do those have alt text? Everything. Is there a really consistent message being given by ensuring that every aspect of what you're doing to be inclusive of people with disabilities is in fact accessible? So John, you started to touch on it, but you were implementing accessibility features like this at Google and Instagram. What was that like?
Right. Yeah. So I guess I would mention a couple aspects to this that I think are interesting. The first is, as you might imagine, Google and Instagram have a ton of amazing internal guidelines, some of which they publish externally. You know, if you're a new developer trying to learn Flutter or something, you can go to Flutter's accessibility guidelines. It's all public documentation, and it's really, really good. So I joined Google when I was still fairly young. I didn't really know that much about accessibility. It was a great place to learn reading those guidelines. Another thing they have, as you might imagine, is just expertise. There's engineers there that know 10 times more about accessibility than I do, and they know the legislation, and they just understand, the common problems that people are going to run into. And if you're working at a company like Google and Instagram, you have fairly easy access to those amazing resources. And I know a lot of times when I ran into accessibility issues with apps that I was developing, I reached out to those, kind of gurus and just asked them for help, basically. Another really important thing that they have, and I'm not as familiar with this part at Instagram, but I'm sure it exists. But at Google, I released several apps. I was basically, started as a founder on a bunch of different apps, took them all the way to public release. And when you're publicly releasing something at Google, you go through a very kind of arduous process. And one step of that process is an accessibility review, where you have experts, people who understand the legislation, WCAG and, Section 502. They use your app, they turn on the screen reader, they turn on different modes, different rendering modes, so that they can see how your app might look like to a colorblind person. And they will reject your app if you don't pass this review. So I guess my point there is they have very good systems for sort of catching accessibility problems and preventing like apps that are inaccessible from being released to the public. But the other sort of flip side of this that I also find interesting is that on each individual engineering team, you more or less have autonomy with how you approach developing your app. So I was on different teams where, maybe one team waited until kind of the very end, right before release, to try to develop and make sure everything was super accessible and fix bugs where they found them. And I was also on other teams that kind of built it into their process, where every feature they developed, they had testing. The engineers always had it top of mind, like, oh, this has to be accessible, this has to be usable. So I definitely found that interesting. And that was true at Instagram as well, where engineering teams had a lot of autonomy with how they approached it.
And I know a best practice that we've talked about, and something that you've even shared with me in some of our separate conversations, is the value of having your target audience, your user, included from the start, not just at the end. So specific to this, having people with disabilities included from the start for all of your processes when designing these apps, when testing the accessibility. Can you speak to that a little bit more? What was that experience like? Where did you find and how did you find individuals to help you test all of these apps you were creating?
Of course, yeah. So I was lucky enough to be at Google, obviously a lot of resources at their disposal. I worked on one app in particular called Google Classroom. And it's a learning management system. It was meant to be deployed to classrooms all over the world, international. So one of the things that was incredibly important on that team was equal access and equal protections. And part of that is accessibility. You can't have equal access without accessibility. So from the very first days of developing that project, and I joined that project as a founder, so I was one of the first 5 engineers, we were concerned about accessibility, and we had connections with schools all around the tri-state area. And we also had connections with international schools. We went to France a few times. We also went to Ghana, which was amazing. But anyway, what we did is we would invite students to come on site. And we actually set up a little classroom inside Google. We had desks and everything. And we'd invite 30 students at a time. They would sit sort of in a classroom environment, and we would all use the app together. And honestly, that is the best way of, finding issues, realizing when your app works and when it doesn't work, is when you're showing your app to actual users and you're getting feedback from end users. That's it's gold in terms of feedback. If you have the resources to be able to do something like that and create a pipeline where actual people are coming on site, I would highly recommend that.
And of course, we have a different situation in which a lot of us are not working on site. A lot of us are not in person. We are all remote or virtual in some kind of way. In order to potentially find people to help test your products, just include them in your processes, in your discussions. Maybe you're redesigning a new page for your website. Maybe you're creating some kind of new event and you want to make sure that's accessible in some kind of way. What would you recommend people do to reach those individuals or to broadcast this out? Is it something as simple as an internal survey and just saying, hey, we're launching something, do you want to be a part of it? Or I know a lot of companies have employee resource groups for people with disabilities to potentially leverage, but is there anything else that you suggest, or would you recommend that being the best way to really advertise that?
Yeah, actually, and I can even speak to that because I'm a member of a smaller company now. I co-founded my own company. We're a software consultancy, and we deal with these issues because we don't have the resources of Google. It's a lot harder to speak to actual users. But your suggestion that you just gave, sending out user surveys, and this is exactly what we do. If we're implementing a new feature and we're worried that it's going to be confusing or that we're not really making the clearest possible new page or whatever, we will send out a survey to users and we'll be like, hey guys, what do you think of this? We also have one app in particular is a math tutoring app. And we are connected with a few tutors, and we will have those tutors use new features with their students. So it's really vital to set that up. And that was one of, as the engineering lead at my company, like that was one of the things that I worked out early on, is get a test environment that you can get actual people to look at so that you can vet these new features. You can make sure they work before you put them in front of, real end users and stuff's all broken. So yeah, you mentioned the survey approach. I really like that approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the questions we always like to ask, especially with your experience in a couple different organizations and now your own, is what have been some of the biggest challenges that you've come across? Accessibility can feel like a daunting thing to tackle. Where do we start? How do we even start this journey? What challenges are we going to come across? Anything expected and unexpected that you ran into, or how did you overcome those challenges?
Yeah, so a few quick stories. The first was at Google, actually at this team Google Classroom. That I was still a pretty young engineer at the time. And that was my first experience where leadership all the way down to, just a lowly engineer like myself, everyone had accessibility top of mind. And it was just how the team was run. Like I remember our engineering manager herself would be testing, have the screen reader on and be testing accessibility. So it's just part of the team culture to get it right. And when we launched Google Classroom, it actually received the highest accessibility score you can get internal to Google. They have their own internal scoring mechanism for this. And that was something that, the team and I were just incredibly proud of. But I think it came from that culture of just building it into the process. And I think we actually produced a better product as a result. And yeah, another quick story that I can tell was at Instagram. I worked at Instagram for a time, and one of the first things you do when you started a new company as an engineer is you sort of look up like what bugs exist out there. And I quickly found that Instagram, the Android app, had a lot of pretty severe accessibility problems, especially regarding text rendering. And earlier, Drew mentioned using native widgets for rendering text, but because Instagram is doing a lot of really cool things with text, like they have embedded links, they change fonts inside their text, and they're just generally doing a lot of interesting things. They have a lot of custom code that controls all of that. And it wasn't very accessible. So that was a time where I reached out to one of those accessibility gurus. I had him kind of walk me through what would be the process for fixing that. And yeah, I fixed a bunch of Android accessibility problems. It was pretty hairy, but got through it. And definitely one of the better feelings in my tenure at Instagram was getting that right. And just the idea that some user turning talk back on is having a better experience because of some bug that I fixed. It's a good feeling.
Sure. So I want to ask you, what is your recommendation for who to reach out to internally? I know we mentioned here are some of the ways that you can find people to help test accessibility, but how do you recommend really going about that process if you want to do more of a formal test or audit, let's say accessibility audit of your website? What departments should you loop in internally? If you just want to start the conversation or find out more yourself, are there third parties that you would recommend asking and reaching out to? So would love your thoughts, and then Drew would love to hear your thoughts afterwards as well.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that real people is the best way to test this type of thing. But what I would say is, first, there's actually a lot of tools that you can use. Just as an example, in the Chrome dev tools, there's something called Lighthouse, where you can just click a single button and Lighthouse will kind of scan your app, and it will tell you if you have any serious accessibility problems. And that's just one tool. There's a lot of Chrome extensions. I think Microsoft developed a Chrome extension that's people really like. I've never used it, but I've heard it's very good. So that would be kind of my first recommendation, is to just try out those tools. You might be able to fix a lot of, kind of low-hanging fruit issues just by doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I would second that. There are some automated testing tools, and there's a lot of opportunity to build accessibility testing, automated and otherwise, into your development operations. So I mean, I think, yeah, if you're talking about testing an application, go to them first and help them, or try to verify whether or not they understand accessibility. Hopefully they've been designing with accessibility in mind from the beginning, or if not, the accessibility universal design, incorporating people with disabilities into their design. And there are there are tools out there. Google Lighthouse is one. There are others. There are other companies that have tools that you can use. Again, whether to bake into your development operations and incorporate automated testing, there are some automated testing rule sets. Axe Core is a popular one. HTML Code Sniffer another. The Axe Core is developed by a company called DQ that, and here I am. I don't intend to be giving an advertisement as a government federal government representative, but there are some great tools. The point is, there are great tools out there. DQ is not the only one. I could name several others. So there are options to integrate automated testing into your development operations. And there are tools that are all, one keynote is that automated testing can't find everything for you, simply because of the nature of how those web content accessibility guidelines are written. One small example we use over and over again, alt text, alternative text for an image. An automated tool can detect whether or not there is an alt attribute for an image. but it can't tell you how good it is. So the image could say boat, or the alt text could say boat, or it could give some random file name. But it could be, it's actually Leonardo DiCaprio on front of the Titanic, whatever, and that, what's more meaningful. So it is necessary also to do manual testing, and there are manual testing approaches. I've been involved in developing those, and there's training out there that you can get, or that you can get for your developers and testers to help them better understand how to test for accessibility.
All of those resources are extremely valuable and helpful to know, because I think one thing we've talked about is the fact that accessibility is all of our responsibility. It's not just in the hands of your developer or somebody who's in charge of your company's website. It is for you as a member of talent acquisition, or in your marketing or branding, or whichever other departments you might be a part of. Even if you're an intern, you have the right to ask about that, and to make sure that your company's websites, your company's processes are accessible.
Yeah, Sarah, if you don't mind, if I come back to that point, if we're thinking about who should be involved in testing for accessibility, or maybe the better question is who should be involved in creating accessible content, and that's really, it's a lot of people. It's really anybody who's creating content that one of your customers might consume. And so really everyone should, on some level, should have some understanding of how to create accessible content. And again, there's a lot of great, whether it's a PDF document or a Word document or a web page, even an Excel spreadsheet, there are resources out there. But I'll offer one. My organization maintains a site called section508.gov, and it's intended to be a one-stop shop for all information about how to conform to the Section 508 requirements. And there are links there for training and resources on how to create an accessible Word document, for instance. I think it's your marketing department, it's your developers who are putting content on your website or in your apps, but it's you too. If you're creating a document and converting it to a PDF to post on your website, it's important to make that accessible as well.
Yeah, I love Drew's answer. I kind of want to piggyback off of it, because I really do think everyone in the organization has to have some knowledge of accessibility in order to properly get it right across the entire organization. Another important element is just communication. I know that when I was at Google pretty early on, I didn't know that much about accessibility, but the designers on my team did. They had formal training. They understood, color contrast and how that can, ruin a website's experience for a colorblind user. And only through, constant conversation with them, I used to sit right next to my designers. Only through constantly conversing with them and just slowly gleaning all of this information was I able to sort of become like a better informed developer. And that would not have happened if there wasn't just open lines of communication between, me and user experience, me and design, me and product management. So I think that's one other really important aspect, is just the organization has good communication.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I know, Drew, I asked you at the beginning, but John, if you can expand on that, why do you feel, just even from an engineer's perspective, why is accessible design important? What have you seen as the result of not having accessible design? Have you received feedback? Has that impacted the performance of an app or the performance of something that you've released?
Yeah, so I want to kind of give two answers to this. The first is sort of a cheesy answer, and that is that I just think it's the duty, if you're a big company and you have a lot of resources at your disposal, you kind of have this solemn responsibility to get it right. And I can use real world examples. One is Instagram. Instagram has almost 2 billion users. You think of an accessibility issue affecting maybe 0.05% of users. Well, that's 1 million people, if I'm doing the math correctly. So my point is, you have engineering resources at your disposal. You have the bandwidth to fix these issues. Usually that they're there. you should fix them. It's your responsibility. But the second answer that I would give, this is probably what I would tell a CEO of a company. It's a much more pragmatic answer, is just that if you as a team have it as part of your culture to be concerned about the end user, to be thinking about accessibility and usability, which in my mind, accessibility and usability are very related. So if all of this stuff is top of mind while you're developing, you're going to create a better product. And I've seen it happen. I mean, I've been on teams where, the user just sort of becomes this nebulous like concept in the distance. You never meet an end user. You're never interacting with, someone who might be an actual user. And it's just harder to build a good product. It's much easier when you have a connection with your user. And I think that's what building accessibility into your process can do. It can make you feel more connected with your user, and you'll build better software.
Mm-hmm. And piggybacking off of that, so now moving forward with this process, with this project of, I want to be fully accessible. I want to make sure our website, our processes, everything is reviewed and audited, and make sure that that is accessible. Is there a certain cost to making sure that you are fully accessible and to testing that? Do you recommend, I know a lot of companies have a central accommodation budget. Should there be an accessibility budget, or should part of that accommodation budget be used? So John, I know you were just kind of finishing your thought there. Would love your thoughts on that. And then Drew, would love to hear from you too.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly couldn't speak to like numbers. I'm just honestly unaware of that. But what I will say is, having been on teams where, accessibility was truly built into the process, and been on other teams where, it's more wishy-washy, you're not necessarily thinking about it in the day-to-day, and then you might try to scramble and fix everything at the last minute. The amortized cost of doing the accessibility items as part of your sort of weekly rituals is cheaper by far than trying to fix it all at the end. So that's one huge thing I would point out. Regardless of what the actual numbers are, it's just cheaper. And the other advantage is you'll build a better app. You'll be more thoughtful about who your user is, and the experience will be better for the average user.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with John. I think, and it's probably also important to kind of differentiate between, accommodation versus, accessibility up front. And, accommodation is kind of, well, we're planning to not be accessible, and so we're going to provide a workaround, an accommodation. And I would highly recommend not planning to provide accommodations, but to build in accessibility up front. And really that I think is the, there are organizations that have kind of like centralized accessibility. So, all right, you finish your product and then give it to me, and I'm going to tell you all of the things you need to do to fix to make it accessible. But just like any bug or issue, the further along you get in the development process, as John is saying, the costs get exponentially higher to fix bad code the further along you get in the process. So fix it before it ever becomes a problem, and that's that would be my response, is that rather than thinking of it as something you bolt on after the fact, really build it in as you go, and just like so it's hard to quantify the costs. There is some additional costs involved, but when you make it part of your process and it just becomes, I'm thinking about a person with this disability as I design it and as I define my requirements and as I build, then it's really just part of that. And so there's an incremental cost along the way, but it's so much smaller than if you were to try to address it at the end. So yeah, I mean, building it as you go is the best way to do it. And I think, you can think of it it's similar to security. Would you, do you say you have a security budget? Well, I mean, typically, no, you make sure that your stuff is, yes, there's cost involved, but as you build in security. You don't wait till the end to then make sure that your stuff is secure. And yes, there's always maybe something you have to, you realize at the end they have to fix, but you don't bolt on security after the fact. You build that in as you go. So same with accessibility.
That is a great analogy.
I think, speaking to that point, it could potentially be a spectrum like anything else. So John, to your experience being at Google, where you have what seems like unlimited resources, you already have engineers and individuals who have the knowledge. It's more so just bringing them together or finding out the information from them. It could be something where you have enough qualified individuals on this topic who have received training where it doesn't cost you anything to bring in somebody to test either a website or an app or any other process, especially as you bring in other people with disabilities to help test those products. I know we've seen it, just to answer this question, because I know we received it prior to our session today, there are third parties that it ranges. It could cost $500. It could cost $10,000. It just depends on the level of detail that those third parties are going into. It's kind of you get what you pay for. If you want just a couple things checked, it's going to be cheaper. If you want what truly is going to help you become more compliant with WCAG, with Section 508, then you're going to pay a little bit more. But I think exactly to, again, the experience you shared, John, it might not cost anything depending on what type of resources you have, depending on what you have at your disposal already. So
yeah, that's a great point. And also, just generally speaking, it is cheaper the more connected you are with your end user. You mentioned before sending out surveys. If you cultivate that relationship with your end user from the beginning, and your users are more responsive, more receptive to helping you beta test, you can save a lot of money by just having that strong connection with your user. So I agree that hiring a service to do proper accessibility testing can be really, really good for your app or whatever you're building. But also just trying to maintain a good connection with your user.
Mm-hmm. And so I want to talk about requirements a little bit, John. We've talked a little bit about external facing apps and making sure that those are accessible, and even for compliance reasons, you're required to. But what about internal facing apps? Are companies required to make sure that internal facing apps are accessible as well?
Yeah, I'm sure Drew can speak more about the legality of this, but from my experience at Google, it was interesting because even if you were launching an app internally, you still had to go through the same release process as if you were launching externally. So you still had to go through that accessibility review. You'd still have, this kind of uninterested third party. I mean, they were Google employees, but they weren't connected to your team. They were going through this process of testing your app. So all of the internal apps at Google, I'm not sure about Facebook, but I'm sure they have strict requirements. I just wasn't involved in launches at Facebook. But at Google, I can definitely say that all the internal apps have gone through the same accessibility testing as the external apps. So they definitely had a strict requirement for accessibility.
As far as the federal government is concerned, absolutely, government agencies need to make their internal applications and internal websites accessible. As for private industry, you probably need to seek advice from your own general counsel to determine whether or not really everything has to be accessible. But best practice to definitely make it accessible. As Sarah, you indicated that, there are a number of people that have disabilities that don't self-report. To prevent the possibility that you could discriminate against one of your employees, absolutely, just make it accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and one other thing I would add to this is I think one of the most valuable resources a company can have is a diverse workforce. And, I don't just mean ethnically diverse, diversity of ideas, diversity of life experience. So what that means is, you probably have persons with disability as part of your workforce. And if your internal apps are not accessible, you're going to alienate parts of your workforce. Either that, or you're just going to have this completely homogenous workforce, which is bad.
Well, and John, I'd love to hear, I'd love to hear that at Google and places like Google that, it's just built into your process. And so just like you're releasing an internal app, same process you would go through for releasing a public app. I mean, it's just good practice. You get better products, you get, more inclusivity, of course. And why would you follow a different process for internal apps than you would for an external app? I mean, it just bake it in and make it part of your culture and make it part of your process. And then you don't have to worry about whether or not it's, could ever see the light of day outside your organization.
Absolutely.
I loved the analogy that you used, Drew, relating this to security and making sure that everything has security built into it from the start. You wouldn't just do that as an afterthought once you've fully completed your project or whatever you're creating. But speaking to that, there are questions, and we received a question as well around safety. Are there accessibility challenges or gaps as it relates to online safety? Is that something that you're aware of or that you can speak to?
Yeah, there are kind of some interesting challenges related to privacy and security specifically, and tying back to accessibility. I mean, first of all, in general, we're talking about people that are targeting vulnerable individuals often target people who are older, and are just more vulnerable in general, and that includes people with disabilities. But maybe to kind of like paint a couple of scenarios where people that encounter applications or IT that is not accessible, where it then makes them more vulnerable to privacy or security concerns. Let's say, for instance, you have an ATM or a kiosk, and portions of it are not accessible, and so now somebody that needs to rely on that in order to get money or to register for a driver's license, now they might need to ask somebody else for help to use the ATM, and now they're exposing their private information, bank account information, to somebody else who maybe some just random stranger, or it could be at work even, browsing over the browser. Again, whether I'm accessing my bank account or submitting an application for a mortgage, if it's not accessible and now I have to ask somebody else for help, an unscrupulous individual might then keep track of that information and use it later on to take advantage of that person. Even if it's something like your website for delivery or something, and again, your forms are not accessible, or let's say somebody has low vision and they have to zoom in, and your web page is not very responsive, or responsive at all, and now the fields get jumbled with the labels, and now they enter their credit card information in the delivery driver instructions, and so now they're exposing themselves. So those are some real scenarios where people with disabilities become even more vulnerable when you don't make your IT accessible. One other consideration is that sometimes, even when we're the very act of making things more secure, sometimes we leave out or we make it more difficult for people with disabilities. One really simple example, the automated Turing tests, the CAPTCHAs that you encounter, they have, some of those have had some really inaccessible implementations. They've gotten a lot better. Google's CAPTCHA or reCAPTCHA is a great example of one that works really well. But even that, the way that it works now is it kind of essentially tracks your behavior in the browser, and sometimes it links with other cookies and whatever to determine whether or not you are a person. And so you'll just get that check mark, oh, I'm not a human, without even having to interact with it, or I am a human, without even having, or you check the box and it goes green, whatever. You don't have to do any additional task. But now I can't say definitively because we haven't done enough research, but it seems that people using screen readers more often encounter that second test. And so now you're adding a second hoop for the user with a screen reader to jump through to now pick the images or whatever, listen to the audio or read some obscured text or obfuscated text. So now you're adding one more hoop for the person with a disability to jump through. all, in the interest of security, but now it's making it less, less user friendly for that user with a disability. So there are kind of some interesting challenges associated with privacy and security that are peculiar and maybe more challenging for people with disabilities, and certainly things to pay attention to.
Yeah, I really like that answer. And one thing I would add, this is kind of not as much an answer to the question, but kind of a food for thought item, is just the importance of online safety when it comes to community. When I was at Facebook and Instagram, we spoke a lot about varying communities. Some of them were very silly. Some of them were very, very serious. One in particular that, I'll never forget, we spoke about a community dealing with self-harm on Instagram. And it was a place where, if you were in a dark place, you could come to that community. You could meet, people who had similar life experiences. And it was just this very therapeutic place for a lot of people. But if you can imagine, what if Instagram didn't have good accessibility and people with disabilities were unable to reach those types of communities? Or they could reach them, but they didn't feel as safe because the app didn't work as well for them. So that's just one area where you can start to see the kind of awesome responsibility that app developers have when it comes to things like that. If you make accessibility mistakes in certain domains, there can be serious repercussions.
They're all really great examples. I think bottom line is accessibility applies to everybody. What you implement for people with disabilities creates a better user experience for everybody. It's the same thing that we say when you implement accommodations proactively for people with disabilities. It creates a better workplace, a better candidate experience for everybody overall. So I want to thank you both for sharing all of your information, all of your knowledge and your experience today. I know we have a couple minutes left, so I really wanted to end with one question, which is, for those that are new to this, for those who are just starting out, do you have one piece of advice on either where to start, the single place on where to start with this, or again, framing this up to stakeholders and making sure that this is a priority to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was my coworkers. When I was first starting in this, I heavily leaned on people who knew more about it than I do. And I think accessibility is one of those things that's hard to learn about, and it's really hard to get right. And, you just need to be relying on the experience of people who know more than you. So that's the first place I always look.
Yeah, my recommendation would be to make it personal. It's very likely that you know somebody with a disability who encounters these kinds of issues, but you don't know because you don't ask, and they're trying to be unobtrusive, and so they don't tell you. It's likely that you have a coworker or a friend or even a grandmother or grandfather that aside from not being familiar with technology, might also have they might have disabilities. They might so find somebody that you know. Or if you can't find anybody, there are plenty of stories online. Find somebody who you know that's deaf or blind or has cerebral palsy and has difficulty grasping or using a mouse. Find somebody like that and ask them about their experience using IT. Maybe even ask them what it might be like to navigate your website. And I think that experience will be eye-opening for you. You'll see what their day-to-day life actually is like, relying on technology and having a disability. So yeah, make it personal. If you don't know somebody, find somebody and ask them about their experience using IT.
I love that. I think advice for anything is when you can understand someone else's experience that is different than yours, it hits you in a different way. It makes it important to you. I can say that my husband is colorblind, so just as an example, and I have other family members that are colorblind as well. Even looking at the CDC map of which areas are safe or not safe or somewhere in between for COVID, it's red and it's green, which for us, we all know red and green, but for him and for other family members that I have, it's not that simple. The state that is red right next to the green one, it might be a little bit harder to quickly digest the information, looking at the country as a whole that's entirely color coded and has various shades of green, various shades of red. Same thing, you send a document through and you say, okay, we're using these 6 colors to indicate where something is. And I'm being asked, did I just choose the correct color? Did I just choose blue or did I choose purple? Having something other than colors to label something is extremely helpful, and that makes it helpful for everybody. So I know we've talked a lot about website accessibility, IT, app accessibility, but this applies to documents as well. This applies to physical accessibility, which Drew, I know you touched on at the very beginning, just using it as an analogy, walking into the front of the building. Well, as people start to go back to work, we've focused so much because of the pandemic on virtual and, again, web accessibility, but you still have to keep the physical accessibility of your building in mind. As people return, take a look at that. Are all of your bathrooms accessible? Are all of your entrances accessible? You're going to be hiring new people. What kind of message are you giving? So it's just something that I wanted to reiterate that is just as equally as important, even if you still are sitting outside of your typical workspace or your typical work building. But we are just at time. So again, I wanted to thank you, Drew and John, for everything that you've shared today. I wanted to thank you for joining us in this discussion, which is extremely important, especially as we are celebrating and recognizing NDEAM with the theme of increasing access and opportunity, especially for people with disabilities. So thank you all for your time again. And if anybody has any questions that they didn't have answered, please feel free to reach out to us directly. Please feel free to reach out to your dedicated account manager directly as well. And we'd be more than happy to either connect you to Drew and John or to answer that ourselves. So thank you all again and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Take care all.